You should not criticise nor make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. Members should also be aware that under the salient rulings of the Chair, members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official by name in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. Can I now call on Mr. Paul Maguire to make his opening statement?
Thank you, Chairman. Last February, RTE broadcast a prime-time special programme entitled Profiting from Prostitution, which investigated certain aspects of prostitution in Ireland. Now, under normal circumstances, as an investigative journalist, I would investigate a particular story. We'd make the programme, we'd broadcast the programme, and we'd leave it at that, making no further comment. I just want to state for the record from the outset that as a journalist I'm not here making a submission, nor am I expressing any personal opinions about the current legislation or the current review of the legislation being undertaken by the committee. Last year I was invited by a number of senators and deputies to brief them on the statistical findings from the research that was carried out in the making of the programme. And again today, in attending the hearing, I'm happy to brief the committee on the findings of the research and to reiterate that I'm not expressing any personal opinion or making a submission. In February 2011, as I said, Primetime broadcasts a special report into prostitution in Ireland. The programme followed almost a year of intensive investigation and research where we used technology to trail hundreds of women that were being moved all over Ireland on a daily basis. In order to determine the level, or what we saw as the level of organised movement or forced movement of women here in this country, we created a database which recorded every single movement of every escort every day that was advertised on the internet. And over a 12-month period, the database indicated a high level of organisation and management behind the movement of hundreds of women every week right across the country. On average, during the period in question that we were monitoring the internet, 438 women either moved or were moved every week. Further analysis of those figures revealed the level of organisation behind the movement of those average 438 women. For example, in the period in question, 446 women moved from Cork to Dublin, and in the same period exactly the same number of women, 446, moved the reverse way round from Dublin to Cork. 358 moved from Galway to Dublin, while 354 moved in the opposite direction from Dublin to Galway, and 295 moved from Belfast to Dublin, while 291 moved from Dublin to Belfast. And that pattern is repeated for every town and every city around the country. The numbers wouldn't be in the situation there in relation to the movement between Cork and Dublin and Cork. It just happened to be that the figure was exactly the same, 446 in one direction, 446 in the other. Normally, if you looked at the patterns, there would be maybe give or take 5 or 10 in the difference between any two towns or city within the movement. But as I say, they're just an indicator of a much bigger movement of women, and it's repeated right across every town and city. During the 12-month period that we were looking at this in advance of the programme, there were in excess of 8,800 profiles advertised on websites, and the daily average number of women advertised was roughly 693, just short of 700. Now that can vary depending on the different periods in time. For example, around Christmas it might go down, around the summertime it might go up, but it was averaging out just under 700 at 693. Some of the profiles of the 8,800 profiles were possibly repeat profiles or duplication profiles, or individuals who used maybe 2 or 3 different profiles to advertise different services. The average age of the women advertised was 25.1 years of age. 19.36 of all of the escorts advertised were 21 years old or younger. Almost half of all of those advertised themselves as 25 years of age or younger. 97 of the women advertised, which is 1.1% of the total number, were advertised as being Irish, while 283, or 3.2%, were advertised as UK citizens. The vast majority, which was 95.69%, were advertised as foreign nationals. When we looked into that in greater detail and we investigated it further, we found that many of those advertised as foreign nationals weren't actually, in fact, revealing their true nationality. For example, many women from poorer Eastern European countries, like, say, for example, Romania, were advertising themselves as being Spanish or French. The number of women advertised as working for an agency was just 67, which is about 0.76% of the total number. The vast majority, 99.24%, were advertised as working as independent escorts, working for themselves. However, again, our research, which we showed extensively in the programme, revealed this to be completely untrue. In fact, most of the women that we found or that we came across, that we interviewed, that we spoke to, or that we researched into, were working for a pimp or some kind of organiser. They weren't working as independent women. Another indicator of the level of organisation comes from the evidence that we gathered relating to mobile phones. During the 12-month period, we found in excess of 7,300 mobile phone numbers being used through the internet and through a couple of websites. More interestingly, we discovered some form of linkage between 5,168 of those phones. In some cases, the phones had multiple users at different times, multiple profiles at different times. In other cases, the numbers, despite being used at two different ends of the country, one in Cork and maybe one in Belfast or one in Dublin, the mobile numbers were actually just 2 digits apart. SIM cards we're told by the mobile operators, are sold in packs of 10 sequential numbers. As a result, then, statistically, the odds of two numbers, 1 or 2 digits apart, appearing at different ends of the country are astronomically high. It just doesn't make sense that if a pack of 10 is sold in Dublin, for example, and they're 2 digits apart, how is one of them appearing in Cork a couple of days later? And also, I mean, that's just one example. That pattern is repeated right across the whole country. That's about as much of the statistical information that we have.
Superintendent Healy, or invite you to make an opening remark, please.
Chairman, may I begin by thanking the Chairman and the Committee for this opportunity to address you here this afternoon on such an important issue, particularly looking at the ways in which the legislation governing prostitution, in which it could be enhanced to deal with the more effectively emerging trends of prostitution industry. We are of course happy to assist the Committee in whichever way in relation to the operational policing aspects. However, it would not be appropriate for us to answer questions concerning government policy, and that of course would include expressing views regarding any appropriate legislative model that might be applied in the future. The Gaeltacht Cheana has targeted on-street prostitution, but has done so more particularly with the enactment of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 1993, which criminalises soliciting, importuning and loitering for the purpose of prostitution or the commission of sexual offences in public places. This legislation has dramatically reduced the number of persons engaged in on-street prostitution over the last decade. Organised prostitution or off-street prostitution has advanced with the expansion of technology, so much so that the majority of industries rely on the internet and mobile telephone technology to facilitate the smooth running of illicit operations, which in itself has proved difficult for investigating Gardaí due to the faceless nature of the mobility in these technologies. Over the last decade, Irish escort industry has developed into a destination of choice for working prostitutes, which was mainly due to the economic boom, along with the expansion of the European Union. During this time, people engaging in prostitution industry were earning 3 times the rate of other European destinations. This resulted in the estimated 800 female prostitutes advertising their services via the internet on a daily basis within the jurisdiction. As a result, prostitution services are offered and are available on every county within the jurisdiction. In the 3 years since 2010, the criminal proceedings and conviction rates under the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 1993 are as follows. For the offences of brothel keeping, there were 65 proceedings commenced in 2010 with 21 persons convicted. For organising prostitution, the offences proceeded were 7, there were 3 convictions. For soliciting and importuning prostitution, 102 proceedings with 19 convictions. Loitering for purpose of prostitution, 21 proceedings with 12 convictions. And living off the earnings of prostitution, 7 proceedings with 1 conviction. In 2011, the brothel keeping figures proceedings commenced 62 with convictions 17, organising prostitution 3, proceedings commenced with 1 conviction, soliciting and importuning for prostitution 107 proceedings with 19 convictions, loitering for the purpose of prostitution 35 proceedings commenced with 17 convictions, living off the earnings of prostitution 4 proceedings commenced with 1 conviction. In 2012, the figures relating to the same offences, brothel keeping 47 proceedings commenced with 8 convictions, organising prostitution 1 proceedings commenced with 1 conviction, soliciting or importuning for prostitution 46 proceedings commenced with 3 convictions, loitering for the purpose of prostitution 16 proceedings commenced, there has been no conviction to date, and living off the earnings of prostitution 2 proceedings commenced with no conviction to date. Prostitution by its nature affects the wider community and society because of the manner in which it is conducted, particularly when done so in public places. However, the main source of advertising for prostitution is the internet, and a one-to-one contact between prostitutes and potential clients is conducted via the mobile telephone network. It is suspected that this may evolve to the social networking sites or other communication methods in the near future, if it is not already happening. The Department of Justice and Equality discussion document on future direction of prostitution, issued in August 2012, seeks answers as to the way in which criminal law on prostitution addresses the rights of communities and the society in general. Chapter 1 of that report acknowledges that prostitution has largely moved indoors since the last major review of prostitution legislation, which was enacted in Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act in 1993. And Garda Síochána have long since held the view that 2 of the most vulnerable groups in society must be at the forefront of those being children and vulnerable persons, and secondly, people who find themselves the victims of prostitution trade, or the document refers to them as sex workers. The Garda Síochána would see the introduction of anonymity provision for vulnerable witnesses as a way of greatly assisting the investigation, whereby it would curb or at least alleviate the fear of media exposure. A number of legislative provisions already exist in this area. Section 7 of the Criminal Law Rape Act 1981 and Section 11 of the Criminal Justice Human Trafficking Act 2008. This provides reassurance that the witnesses would not suffer further stress or trauma exposure to media in any subsequent prosecution which may be initiated. Secondly, the use of mobile telephone technology. Throughout the last decade, prostitution has significantly increased within the jurisdiction. Garda operations have been conducted, for example Operation Gladiator and Operation Quest, to investigate the prostitution industry, specifically within the Dublin region. Both operations were conducted at different times within the last decade. An analysis of these operations conclude that mobile telecommunications advancements has contributed significantly to the expansion of the industry. Both brothels and escort agencies advertise their services on numerous websites and provide their contact details, usually mobile telephone numbers, through these sites. On contacting these numbers, a person can arrange a call-out service to a nominated address or alternatively receive directions to a specified address. These facts are supported by operational experience as well as on foot of evidence from numerous witnesses who have provided statements in Garda investigations. To highlight the significance of mobile telecommunications within the industry, it is proposed to briefly detail an investigation which was conducted into prostitution. A surveillance operation was put in place in respect of a brothel operating in Dublin, from which there was upwards of 16 working prostitutes. During the course of the surveillance operation, a number of witness statements were taken from patrons who had just exited the brothel. All those interviewed stated they rang a mobile phone number and received directions to the brothel. Following the surveillance operation, the premises itself were searched. A number of follow-up searches were carried out, including a search of a particular apartment which had been identified as a call centre. At this apartment, 35 mobile phone telephones were recovered. 27 of the phones recovered were prepaid phones. The phones were being used exclusively for the purpose of organising habitual prostitution. Extensive documentation supporting this fact was also recovered. These phones corresponded to a number which were listed on websites, and some of them were also corresponded to numbers given in statements by their clients. Further investigations carried out also revealed 14 of the 27 prepaid phones had been reactivated by the user. Those same numbers were again used for the purpose of organising habitual prostitution. The investigating Gardaí soon came to realise that the phones were the lifeline of that particular prostitution enterprise and were very valuable assets to the perpetrators of such crime. Some of these numbers have, over the period of time, been used to establish a cohort of steady clientele. Without these phones, the majority of these brothels would cease to function. Historically, the organisers of prostitution have operated within this jurisdiction with the belief that the Garda Síochána would sporadically target the industry. A noticeable change in the industry has occurred over the last 2 to 3 years, which has seen an increase in the number of foreign nationals associated with the running of prostitution business in the jurisdiction. Some of these individuals are associated with organised crime groups, both in the jurisdiction and their country of origin. It is highly probable that a large percentage of the monies generated from the industry is being redeployed into organised crime groups both domestically and internationally. Finally, the Garda Síochána would look forward to continuing to cooperate with the Joint Committee on Justice, Defence and Equality and the Department of Justice and Equality in identifying ways to enhance the legislation dealing with the prostitution industry in Ireland.
Thank you, Superintendent Healy. Thank you very much. Now, open the floor to any members with questions or any of the witnesses. Okay, Senator Conway.
Just a very quick one for Paul. And your statistics are staggering. And I actually watched that programme in 2011, and I want to commend the very professional way in which he conducted it. Just in terms of mobile phones, and this is based on your evidence and indeed the superintendent's, you can walk into a mobile phone shop and buy a SIM card very easily. There's no identification required, whereas if you're abroad, in some jurisdictions, you walk in and buy a prepaid phone or a SIM card for a prepaid phone. You're required to give your passport. They're required to take a photocopy of your passport, and as such, there's a record of the phone that's sold. Now, I'm of the view, as difficult and all as it is, that every mobile phone should be shut down, or people should have a period of time to register, and there should be some sort of a national database on mobile phones, not just to deal with prostitution but to deal with crime in general. I just wonder what your view on that would be.
Basically, what we found with the mobile phones is that it is quite easy to purchase a mobile phone, because even in the job that we're doing on an ongoing basis, we need to get different SIM cards and that. It depends. I think that it actually depends on where you go. You can go to different branches of the one service provider. You can go to different service providers, and on each different occasion, you may or may not be asked. I think it's kind of potluck at the moment even for identification in relation to purchasing of SIM cards or of mobile phones. As I said at the outset, I'm not here to comment in relation to what legislation we should have in place, but all I can tell you is that, even in what the superintendent was saying there a few minutes ago, obviously mobile phones play a huge part in the whole operation of not only prostitution, but I imagine, as the superintendent was saying there, in other areas of crime as well too. So from that point of view, if there was a situation where there was more monitoring of mobile phones, I mean, just a simple database that we put in place, which recorded all of the phone numbers and then did an analysis of those phone numbers and watched, the differences between the numbers. We were able to identify that in some cases there were 8 out of 10 sequential numbers which were being used in different patterns. I would imagine if there was some kind of a record like that, it might go some way towards controlling the situation.
Of evidence which could be collated for an investigation. It's just a view I've had for a long time, and just
comment on that?
Just that, I suppose the telephones that are being used within the industry are the prepaid phones, and of course there is no provision there to register the details of the purchaser of such telephones. As previously outlined to you, the issues around other areas of crime, it is an issue of concern. However, we have to work within the legislation that is provided at the moment, and it's only telephones that are bill phones that are required to register. So until such time as the legislation has changed in that area, our hands are tied on the matter.
Okay, anybody else? Senator Zappone.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. I have 2 questions for Mr. Maguire. Thank you for your evidence. It's very helpful to us. We've also heard from other contributors that have come before the committee that it's impossible to put a figure on the number of women who are involved in prostitution in Ireland on a daily basis. Just wondering, in light of your research, what would your response to that be?
It is extremely difficult to put a figure on, because it would appear, again from the research, that there are women who are advertised. If you actually talk about, I think you need to differentiate between profiles, which is an image that's put up on a website of a particular individual. In a lot of cases it bears absolutely no relevance to the reality of the individual behind that, but you need to differentiate between actual physical bodies, people who are there and available for sex, for sale, or profiles. It would appear that most of the women involved would have at least 2 profiles, so they alternate between them depending on the area that they're in, depending on the type of services that they're offering. At one point in time, in one particular website, we noticed that the numbers in the early stages of our research, the numbers for each that was given to each profile was going up sequentially, and when just before the programme was aired, it was up at 21,000 profiles. So that doesn't mean that there's anywhere near 21,000 people involved in it, but it just goes to show people can create profiles, and we know for a fact from some of the people that we spoke to, some of the women that we spoke to, that they can have 4 profiles, for example. It's very, very difficult. I mean, the one thing I suppose that is for sure is that there are somewhere between 5 and, we would say at the time, 700. Superintendent was saying that's possibly up as far as 800, because this is something we obviously haven't been monitoring for a while, but there are somewhere between 5 and, I would say, 700 people available every day.
Okay, thank you, and that I think suppose corroborates a bit with some other research. But so in your is that why, in terms of the numbers that you're giving us, then you created a database of the movements, because you could actually witness that as distinct from, I suppose, the profiles and the question mark around numbers in relation to profiles?
We can identify, again, I don't really want to go into it, because obviously it would reveal how we do certain things, and we can't for operational reasons.
Well, I'm just surmising here.
Say why we, that's his line. I got to use it before he did.
Okay, Paul, thank you.
No, but for that reason, I mean, there are markers, for example, that you can monitor, which we would, this is something that we were spending literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for almost a year monitoring, and there are certain markers that you will see, and you can identify certain individuals who have certain characteristics in profiles or whatever, and you then get to understand and get to know or get to recognise the fact that this profile also belongs to this, is associated with this profile, is associated with this profile. Then further, I suppose, delving into those figures, you then see that these individual profiles actually do belong to a body. So you then establish that 3 profiles belong to an actual body, and then you discover similarities in the operation between the different bodies. So you know then that there are actually women who might have multiple profiles, but there's more than one woman involved in this particular operation, and then you monitor the movements around the country and where those profiles come up. So it's quite complicated, but you can actually get down to it. If you drill right into it, you can get down to it.
I think you're sharing with us, it sounds like very sophisticated research methodology, really, that you've developed to do that. Thank you. And maybe this could be for either both Mr. Maguire and Superintendent, or one of you. Just from research or experience, would you comment? Can you comment on approximately how many, or would you say there are a good number of women who would be involved in prostitution and are free to leave the situation of their own volition?
I suppose the nature of the industry itself, in that there's a lot of transient movement of people around the country, and the lifestyle that is associated with the industry, our experience is that it's quite difficult for people to leave the industry once they get into it. I suppose people get into the industry for various different reasons. There are huge financial gains for everybody concerned who are involved in it, and I suppose in one sense the lifestyle might be appealing from a financial perspective, but on the other hand, it's a sinister world in which they operate, and it can, from our experience, be very, very difficult to depart from that.
The other thing that we just found from talking to a number of the women is that it is difficult to actually get out of that lifestyle, because in a lot of cases any paperwork that you might have, including passports and so on, would actually be taken from you. So you're not actually free to leave the country, for example, because you don't have a passport. You don't have any identification papers, which is another common trend. And also as well, from what we looked at in particular in one group of women that we focused on quite heavily, they had appeared to have very little free time where they weren't under management of somebody else. If they weren't being moved at 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody was sitting in an apartment, it would appear, watching what they were doing or managing them, if you like. So there was very little freedom.
Okay, thank you. Deputy McGrath.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to welcome Paul and Superintendent Fergus Seeley as well to the Oireachtas Committee. Just 2 quick questions to Paul. First of all, in relation to your report there, you mentioned that 438 women moved back each week, and then I think one figure you mentioned was 446 from Cork to Dublin. Now that to me would indicate a major problem. You're talking about women prostitutes moving from Cork up to Dublin City and then getting directly involved in the whole sex industry. From your report and from your experience, Paul, can I ask you, are you getting the impression that the situation is getting worse, number one? And number two, was there any impact of the programme and the report in relation to the broader political issue? Because a number of ex-prostitutes have told us that publicity often helps them deal with the particular issue and kind of drives people away. And the second question I'd like to ask you, did you get any deep insight into the lives of those women directly involved in the trade? Like, were they involved because of money? Were the people with major dysfunctional personal problems or mental health problems? Or were they exploited as kids, let's say, as children? Those 2 questions, and then I'll get on to Fergus later.
In relation to the first point that you made there about the women, just to clarify, the 436 that moved from Cork to Dublin and vice versa, that was over a period of the time that we were doing the research. It was about over 8 months. They weren't, that was the total number of movement over an 8-month period.
I thought you said a week.
No, there were, on average we found that there were close to 700 close to 600, 500 women. It varied from week to week that were actually moved from one location to another across the country. We then looked at all of the movements over a much longer period of time to see if there was an element of organisation within these movements. And when we looked at that, then it was amazing to see that X number from any town would move to another town, and almost a similar number would move in the reverse direction as well too. So again, you have to kind of take on board that some of those women as actual people might have had 2 or 3 profiles. So when they were moving, they would take those profiles with them. So the number could have been slightly smaller, but the fact is there were massive similarities between the move between A to B and B to A in any situation across any town or any city. In relation to the impact of the programme, we would have seen that in the immediate aftermath of the programme, the number of individual profiles that were advertised across the internet actually reduced. But funny enough, in advance of coming here today, I just had a look at that situation, and we revisited it for a couple of days, and the number is actually higher now. It is possibly closer to what the superintendent was quoting there, which is closer to 800 profiles being advertised on a daily basis. So it has actually increased. In relation to the women, the question that you asked in relation to getting to talk to the women, we spoke to a large number of women who were involved in prostitution at different stages. Some were involved, had just gotten into it, some were involved for a number of years, some of them had just gotten out of it. It depends very much. If you were talking to foreign national women that were involved in it, I would have to probably say that they were duped into it. I mean, in one particular case that comes to mind, the person thought they were coming here to work as a hairdresser, and when they got here, their papers were taken from them, and they were told that no, it's not hairdressing, it's prostitution, and they were basically put into an apartment on the afternoon that they arrived. In some other cases, there were situations where Irish nationals were forced into prostitution. I'd have to say, I know, there was a lot of comments on social media sites following the programme where people were saying, women were saying, I'm involved in prostitution, and I got into it of my own free will, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm making money out of it. I'd have to say that I spent over a year working on this, and I couldn't find somebody that could say that to us.
Yeah, of course. Superintendent Fergus Healy. Just in relation to Superintendent, you mentioned there one of your figures was 65 brothel keepers were charged in one particular series of dates. What kind of personal profile, or what kind of people are people directly that these people charge? Would they have been, we'll say, mainstream people, or would they be connected with criminal gangs, or would they, inverted commas, be respectable middle-class people who are just running this as a kind of as an income-raising exercise? Are there serious criminal elements involved in those kind of cases?
Well, as I said in the presentation, there is evidence that this is sophisticated and an organised industry that's been managed by individuals who, I suppose, would be considered as people who are, quite sophisticated individuals. And the evidence that we have to date with regard to the way these brothels are managed is that there are people of different types and different backgrounds that get involved in it, but I think the one thing is that they are very sophisticated individuals, and as such they have been amenable before the courts to a certain degree, but yes, there is evidence that people are organised, and organised crime has been involved in it.
And another question, just in relation to the amount, is there any figures available for the amount of brothels operating both in Dublin and nationally, or is that too difficult to get or assess because it's such much under the radar?
From our operational reasons, we wouldn't disclose any of that detail, but obviously we have people who manage and monitor the situation at a national level, and for operational reasons we wouldn't be in a position to disclose that. But
final question, Chair. Yeah. Sure. Just in relation, Superintendent, you mentioned there that the impression was given from those who work in the sex trade industry that the Gardaí sporadically charge the industry. Like, is that the reality, or is there a regular focus kept on that whole issue? Because you have the situation of where women are exploited and abused, as far as I'm concerned. And is it taken as seriously by the Gardaí, even despite the other major serious problems you have in relation to policing? But is prostitution taken very, very seriously at a senior level within the Gardaí? Because sometimes the impression gives it turns up every now and again as a story, and people would be very, very concerned that we need to keep our eye on the ball, and because of certain very violent criminal elements who are in the background, that we need to be focused on that.
I can reassure the Deputy that this is taken very, very seriously at the most senior levels of the organisation, and we have, a sophisticated structure to deal with these matters at a local level and at a national level. And the Commissioner actively monitors the activities of these units in his management meetings through his senior management staff. So I'm quite satisfied that we are dealing with the matter on a daily basis.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chairman.
Okay, Senator McConnell.
Thanks. A couple of questions for Paul. Just want to congratulate Paul again on the. I think sometimes we criticise our national broadcaster, but this is a great example of public service broadcasting at its best. And I know I'm biased in that, and the records can stand for that. But it is. Paul, just a couple of questions on the stats. We had in a private session before this, we heard witness from former prostitutes, and we asked particular questions around money. How much a prostitute might earn on a particular night, and how much indeed a pimp would earn on top of that. In your documentary, you mentioned figures. Could you give us a sense, and I know it might not be scientific, but give us a sense of, in your belief as a journalist, an investigative journalist, what type of monies are we talking about with regards to this so-called industry?
Well, basically, we managed to find some documentation which related to the management of one particular group, which we believed were using up to 15 to 16 women who were being moved around, at the time, 4 or 5 different locations. Those women were advertising a range of services depending on the location that they were in and the time of the year that it was. They were advertising 30 minutes for anything from €60 up to €100. When we got our hands on the documentation related to the individual we believe that was running that operation, it showed over a period of time that this particular individual had accumulated €100,000 out of the women that he was operating. No, it was less than a year. It was. I can't just remember off the top of my head. I think the figures might have been for about 6 months or 8 months, something like that. I know it was definitely less than a year, but I just can't remember the exact time. But it was in excess of €100,000 over that period of time. In speaking to some of the women, they would tell us that they would get, in some cases, they might get half of what they actually took in for whatever period of time. In other cases, there was one particular individual that we spoke to who was paid less than €20 a day, and she had to buy her own condoms and her own cosmetic stuff like soap and toothpaste and all that kind of stuff out of that. In other cases, people were charged excessive rent as well for use of what seemed to be just one room and one bed.
My second question, then I have another question for Superintendent. Just again on young people, what was the earliest age that you came across in terms of women in prostitution with your investigation? Was there a pattern in age? Was there? I mean, I know you mentioned 25, but again, I know it might not be. You can't back it up with evidence, but your sense, was there a significant underage prostitution in your investigation?
It's very difficult to actually answer that question, because obviously we didn't go looking for birth certs or anything like that. But I mean, it would appear that the demand was for younger women. We recorded a number of phone calls from, we set up a researcher with a profile to act as a prostitute on the website, and basically what happened was that most of the calls that we got from what were supposed to be potential clients were looking for people who were very young. There was one particular individual that we came across down the country, and we were so concerned about it that we actually did report the situation to the authorities, because she appeared to be very, very young, and definitely younger even than what she was advertised on the website, and she appeared to be very much under the influence of something. I don't know what it was, but it would appear to be that the demand is for younger people.
Thanks. So my question to Superintendent Healy. Thank you again. And if you can wrap me in the knuckles if I'm asking questions that because I'm new at this. But just on, I'm looking at your stats, Superintendent, on the living off earnings of prostitution. You know, the fact that there's in 2010 there's proceedings commenced 7, 1 conviction. 4 proceedings in 2011 with 1 conviction, and then 2 proceedings in 2012 with so far no conviction. Is it the case that the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 1993 is, how would I put it, needs to be enhanced or supported further with the movement of technology, with the movement of prostitution indoors, or are there other reasons why those convictions or indeed those proceedings aren't as high as they might be, or is that?
Well, I suppose the provision there is Section 10 of the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Act 1993, and the definition of that provision is quite clear, and you know, the onus really is to prove that the person who was involved in this was aiding and abetting, as well as knowingly living off the earnings of prostitution. And that's hence the threshold that the Garda Síochána must present before the DPP makes a decision with regard to whether a prosecution should be initiated or not. And as you can see, it's quite stringent level of evidence that needs to be gathered. So, you know, maybe that might account for the number of the low level of prosecutions in this area, but particularly the sophisticated nature of the proof that's required to deal with it can add to the situation.
Again, we've heard some evidence, a lot of it anecdotal at committee, around the connection between prostitution and organised crime. Again, I know you might be able to answer this question on operation reasons, but broadly, would you concur with that?
Well, I think, look, with organised crime, and particularly the nature of organised crime, people will work in an area where there is money to be made, and prostitution is one of those industries. We have it in other areas, such as fuel smuggling. We have it in areas with a tobacco, illicit alcohol trade. We have a lot of areas where there's sophisticated organisations put in place to, at the end of the day, to make money for these organisations. And as such, you know, prostitution is no different. It's a global problem. It's not a unique problem to Ireland.
Would it be fair to say that in terms of, if you're calling it an industry, it's a huge amount of money changes hand in Ireland, and so it would be seen as a significant, you know, exchange of cash. In other words, it'd be a big business in this country. Wouldn't that be right?
Look, there's a substantial sums of money made through the industry of prostitution, and the Criminal Justice Bureau itself are actively involved in pursuing these people who have, you know, who are making substantial sums of money. So, you know, as I said, it's a global issue. It's not a unique problem in Ireland. It's in all of the countries throughout the world.
Therefore, with your colleagues in the Criminal Justice Bureau, is there a figure you can put on that? Knowing, I mean, I mentioned to Mr. Maguire just on he mentioned a figure of 100,000 within less than a year. Is there, you know, can you help us in looking at what that a macro figure would be? Knowing,
I'm not going to name a figure,
okay,
but I can say that it's definitely in the millions.
Okay, and. Thank you for that. So just a final question then. With the Gardaí and the Beat, we know of very, very good examples of close cooperation between Gardaí and Ruhama, and particularly Store Street. So I have 2 questions. One, can you let us know what some of that cooperation is between voluntary groups that support women in prostitution, or indeed women trying to exit prostitution, and maybe to hear that side. And secondly, is there patterns, or have you found patterns around both the age and the ethnicity or the nationality of women in prostitution as of the last year, so to speak?
Well, I suppose to deal with the initial issue with Ruhama, we have very close cooperation with Ruhama and the agencies that are involved in this whole area. We are closely involved in a training programme with Ruhama. Our members, our frontline members, are trained to, I suppose, create an awareness amongst our members who encounter these problems on a day-to-day basis. So I can say that the working relationship between Ruhama and other agencies, particularly in the health area, are very, very proactive from the Garda Síochána's point of view. And the second point then, in relation to
pattern regarding age of young women entering prostitution.
Look, there's no doubt that the age is obviously an issue, and it's been outlined to you heretofore. We have no evidence to indicate that minors have been involved in this activity whatsoever. It's adult women, but young adult women.
Who sometimes advertise as children as such on the internet, etc., put themselves forward as children. We'd see that all right, but when we bottom it out and carry out the investigations, we don't see children at the end.
Okay, Deputy O'Brien.
I just had a question for Paul, and I think he touched on it there in his previous contribution, in the sense that you were so concerned with one individual that you actually reported it to the authorities. And I'm just wondering, was that an isolated report that was made, or would that have been, how many cases would you have been so concerned about that you felt the need to report it to the authorities as soon as possible? And do we have any indication of what happened to some of the women that were being trailed throughout the course of the programme? Do we know if some of them were rescued from the situations they were in? Do we know if some of them exited the industry? I'm just wondering, because you were obviously following people for a lengthy period of time, you would have seen the natural progression, people coming in, people leaving, and if you can just give us some indication of those who did manage to escape the industry, how they managed to do that.
Basically, there were a number of instances where we were concerned, and during the course of making the programme, we were in communication with Ruhama on a very regular basis, and when any instance arose which was a cause of concern, immediate concern for us, we would have spoke to Ruhama, who in turn were in touch with the Gardaí. In relation to people getting out of the prostitution, I know that on a number of occasions there were individuals who we spoke to and who would have told us about the fact that they would have maybe been in contact with the Gardaí and that, but a lot of the individuals are, you need to understand how much control they feel they are under, and even when services are offered to them, and I know from our communications with Ruhama that they work very closely with the Gardaí, and on a regular basis people who are found in situations that they're working as prostitutes in brothels are actually offered the opportunity to get out of the business and are offered services through the Gardaí with Ruhama, but they just don't take those services, they don't take the offer up, and I think the Gardaí would probably be better placed to actually explain that process to you. I mean, it is a situation where they feel in a lot of cases from the people that we spoke to, they feel incarcerated and trapped and feel that they actually can't get out of it and are afraid. In one case we spoke to somebody who her family back home in Eastern Europe was under threat, that if she didn't didn't work in this particular area, that her family at home were under threat. So it's not as easy to, I would imagine, from talking to the women, it's not an easy life to escape from.
The superintendent could maybe give us some details on people who have exited the industry.
Well, I'm not going to discuss specific issues,
I'm
but
asking you
there is evidence to say that people have left the industry with the cooperation of Rahama and ourselves. And I must say that the services that they do provide to us are of great support. When we have incidents at 4 a.m. in the morning, they are there and available to come to our assistance, which in itself is a very, very valuable facility to be able to call upon. And we have to compliment Rahama and the work that they've done with us in this area.
Deputy Cochrane, Mark Kennedy.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'd like to thank you all for coming in this afternoon. Just to Paul, you mentioned the amount of people who are moving around on a weekly basis, and if you think about it, it's an awful lot of people to move around. How are they moving them around? Are they going by car? Because it's 3 hours, it's 6 hours round trip, and if there's 3 in a car, is it actually by car that they're moving people around, or do we know that?
All I can tell you, Deputy, is in relation to the individuals that we focused on, and there were a number of, there was one very organised group, if you like, plus some other individuals. In relation to the group, there were up to 15 people. On some occasions that went up to maybe 16 or 17. But they were basically being moved 4 and 5 people in a car. Every single week, the individual who was organising these women and moving them from location to location would start at maybe 2:30 in the morning, would drive from Dublin City to Athlone, would drive from Athlone to Ennis, from Ennis to Dundalk, and then back to Dublin. On one occasion, this particular individual did somewhere in the region of 1,200 kilometres in a 22-hour period, and that was a regular occurrence every single week. Some of the women that we spoke to would be told that they'd have to, out of the money that they are paid for the money they get from selling themselves, they would have to purchase their own train ticket and move from place to place. But in a lot of cases we found that people were actually being moved as opposed to moving themselves, and I suppose that would give those who are organising the movement and organising the women probably more control over the women. And as Deputy O'Brien was asking there about getting out of the business, if somebody is moving on a train, for example, it might give them an opportunity to actually escape if that was what they wanted to do. If they're moved by car, I would imagine there'd be more control over the individual and less chance for that person to escape if they wanted to.
And can I ask you, did you establish what type of properties they're operating out of? Because somebody obviously owns them.
Apartments on most cases. Yeah, actually I'd say in nearly all cases it was rented apartments, and in a lot of cases the landlords, we featured one case in the programme where the landlord was completely unaware until complaints were actually, until he received complaints from his neighbours in the apartment block. But in the vast majority of cases that we came across, it was rented apartments.
Okay, thank you. And can I ask Superintendent Healy, you were saying that it's a very sinister trade. Would you say it's dangerous for the women involved in it? And is it primarily women? Are there any occasions that you've come across boys involved in it?
Well, of course, as I said, it is a sinister industry, and control is a big aspect of it. And the way in which that control is fulfilled in itself can manifest itself in various different formats. I would say that it is a very, very dominating type industry, and there are certain people who control it with that in mind. In relation to the male aspect, yes, there are males who are involved in this industry as well, and I think the websites cater for all tastes and types.
Okay, thank you. And I wonder, can I ask you, what, in your investigations over the years, the profile of the users, would you have any indication of what that would be?
Well, it's of all types, all backgrounds. There's no category of individual who would favour using these types of websites or this type of service. It's in the main, male members of society who avail of the services, and that's been the time immemorial. So it's not going to change because the technology has advanced it or made it more difficult to police in recent times.
And you'd agree, because a lot of people are trying to draw the distinction between prostitution and trafficking, that there is a direct link. Is that what you've, in your experience, in some cases, not all obviously?
Yeah. For operational reasons, as I said, I don't want to go into that area, but look, recently we have invested and we are investigating cases where this has come to the fore.
And would you're not part of the anti-trafficking unit though? You're operating separately, or are you working together?
No, we work closely with them. We're all working the Gael Síochána together. We have our own unit there in the National Immigration Bureau.
Thank you.
I think in relation to the trafficking, there is definitely, I would say from our research, forced movement of people, and I think one of the things that we were trying to show in the programme is that when people talk about trafficking, if you talk to somebody in the street, their first thing that pops into their mind is the 40-foot container coming into Rosslare Harbour with a load of individuals hidden in the back of it. What we were trying to show is that in a lot of these cases, trafficking, there needs to be a different definition for trafficking, if you like, that there was a forced movement of people from location to location and they had very little control over that, and that we would suggest is trafficking, if you like.
Superintendent Healy again. In your experience, have you come across people who are wholly autonomous? They go out, they do their work at night, and they come home with all of their money in their pocket? That they have a life, they have family, and that they are wholly autonomous and independent?
There are exceptional cases, I would say, but in the main, it's as described heretofore. There's a certain portion of the money is provided to the people who supply clients in the industry, and the percentages vary depending on where you are. But in the vast majority of cases, the money, is taken over by the people organising the event, organising the trade itself, and the person who is supplying the trade.
Okay, just a few questions from myself, and thank you very much. Mr. Maguire, the Superintendent Healy has said this whole area is worth millions. Could you put a figure on it from your work? Do you agree?
No, to be honest with you, we didn't do a calculation on that, but again, just to say to you anecdotally, most of the people that we spoke to were talking about seeing anything up to between 6 clients on a slow day and maybe 12 to 15 on a busy day. If it's anything to go by, when we set up the researcher with a profile on the website, over a 5-day period, she received 350 calls over a 5-day period, and all 350 people wanted to meet her. So that worked out on average 70 calls a day that the researcher was getting. And the other thing which we did within that was we pretended we were moving the person from different location to location.